Lorna Borland-Kelly, Chief Executive Officer and Managing Partner of Vocal Associates and Chair of Trustees for Pair Power Youth. This is episode 4 of Anti-Racism in Action for further education and higher education in the school sector. I'm going to talk to you about what it means for me. I'm speaking to you as a mother, a grandmother, and a public servant with many years' experience of working across education and social care and health. Anti-racism in action for me will mean a society here in the UK and in wider field where my children and grandchildren, and indeed your children and grandchildren, will have access to services without fear of rejection based on the colour of their skin. A society where they are fully accepted based on merit, action and deeds. Thank you.
Welcome to episode 4, season 2, Anti-Racism Action in Schools. Dane Lorna, thank you so much for what is a really, really good intro and really personal as well. I think it's really great that you could do that for us today. Today is a really, really interesting episode. My co-host is Robin Landman, one of the exec directors of Black FE Leadership Group. Robin, I wonder if you could join us in the studio right now. Hey, Robin, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Gavin. How are you?
Yeah, really, really good. Today we're looking all around schools. We've explored all different sectors within education over the last sort of 2 seasons, but today's really, really interesting and really timely because there was a very interesting article in The Guardian, and there was 4 authors from 4 different head teachers looking at their experience. And we've got two of those authors on the show today, and Patrick as well. And I think it's interesting with different dimensions of schools in there. But I think if we could maybe set the scene a little bit, Robin, because I think there's some really interesting research from the BFELG, making the most of the ethnically diverse Britain. It gave some really interesting stats that maybe the audience wants to hear, and I guess as well. Just under 50% of all schools in England have literally no black teachers. That's quite alarming. Just 14.3% of teachers in state-funded schools are black, which also is pretty alarming. But the numbers are even lower for schools with senior leadership and governance. Only 4% of school governors and 7.3% of head teachers in state-funded schools in England come from a black background. That's crazy. So I think that's something which we're looking to sort of really address today. But Robin, this is something we've seen very similar sort of figures in FE and HE, isn't it?
Yeah, and that's partly why this is such an exciting episode for us, because it's important. We've made great traction with our HE colleagues, and as you know, Gavin, we're developing an HE specific toolkit to sit alongside our FE toolkit. What we'd like to see in an ideal world is all 3 education sectors working together to develop a really strong anti-racist culture. So that's why it's so important to have these very, very experienced leaders to explore what we can do together.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think if we can all learn from each other, we've always learned on each one of these episodes for each of the seasons. No one's got all the answers, have they? It's like, how can we as a collective come together? And we've got 3 really interesting lived experiences here and 3 different elements of the school system as well, which we could do. I wonder if I could bring our guests in, and I just wanted to also highlight that Josephine and Fumi were both also front 50% of the Guardian article, which is titled "There's Absolutely Systemic Racism." BAME, the BAME head teachers share their views. And I think what would be interesting is to bring all of our guests in. So we have got Patrick, who's head teacher of Highgate Wood School, Fumi, who's a head teacher for Bearwood Primary School, Josephine, who's a head teacher for St Martin's in the Field High School for girls. So Josephine, Fumi, Patrick, one of you could join us in the studio. I have it saying join me in the studio. Actually, for those that are regular viewers of Anti-Racism in Action, I'm actually in the office because I had to get the Wi-Fi and internet will go out in the studio. So different settings. Patrick, Fumi, Josephine, really, really good to see you, and thanks for joining us today.
Nice to be here.
So we had we mentioned the Guardian article. Josephine, who was very top of that article, I wonder if you could maybe unpack it a bit around what your experience was for you from sort of teacher to headship, because I found it really interesting read. I wonder, Josephine, if you could kick us off.
Yes, thank you, and thank you very much for inviting us, and thank you, Robin, for the introduction and the start of what we're trying to achieve overall as leaders. For me, when I started as a teacher, I actually came from a Quango. I was working in education, in policy, and when I was in that sector, I could see that people who were making decisions around policy and education were all people who'd come from teaching backgrounds. And I originally didn't want to be a teacher. So I thought, okay, go and get some teaching experience, and then you'll be able to come back and make some decisions around policy. And so I did. And once I did start to get go into teaching, I absolutely loved it. And I felt that was my calling. That's where I needed to be. This is where I'm making immediate impact and an effect on the students that I really wanted to make improvements for. While there, you start to pick up on the internal politics within schools and how they all are made up. And you could start to see quite early on those who were sort of heavily supported and encouraged and highlighted, and those who were ignored. And I was kind of the ignored type of group, even though I would do whatever I needed to do and, you know, show people what I'm capable of and what have you. And I would go for positions and roles, and it would just, oh, you know, not quite enough experience, or, you know, not quite the right role for you. And, you know, over time in the different schools I was in, I could start to pick up on the general culture of the school was not really all embracing. It wasn't as, it might look on the surface that, you know, I was part of, you know, there being a wide diversity, but in reality, systems and structures were not really there to support or encourage me to stay. And, you know, I did continue to teach, but I did get quite a lot of, I suppose I just started to get quite weary by the fact that even though I'm working and I'm doing my best and I know my job and I know my skills, you know, you get people, you know, not quite recognizing or overly fixated in what you can't do, if that makes sense. And so I then started to think, okay, maybe this isn't for me, it's not for education. And the only thing that sort of saved me was a course called Investing in Diversity. And it was run by someone who's got an OBE, Rosemary Campbell-Stevens. And it was only on that course that I realized that I'd built up a repertoire that was for the students that I was really wanting to make a difference for in London, knowing that I was one of the few people that could potentially remain in leadership. When I say few people, you quoted the statistics of how few there are of us. And in a way, it made me think, no, I can't leave. I'm going to continue with the mission, which is to make a difference to the students who have come from very similar backgrounds that I have come from, and I want to keep going. But each time I've tried to increase my role, because I was very interested in leadership, because I felt that's where you make the decisions, that's where you make a difference, because you're then having an influence on not just an individual student, but on the whole school or groups of students or groups of staff. And each time I went for promotions, I would get, oh, not quite, or, oh, you're really good, but, you know, and then I would always find, you know, even when I went into senior leadership roles, that I was up against white males generally. And it was just very, very hard going. And I think some of you have read in the article, I ended up sort of doing a lot of self-filtering and looking at applications and think, right, I'm going to actually research and think, are they likely to appoint me? And if they're not likely to appoint me, I'm not going to put the effort in and putting an application in and, you know, worry about whether I'm going to be shortlisted or not. So even though I would look at lots of applications, I would only put in a select few, thinking and believing it's a, you know, very diverse school. So therefore, it makes sense that they have a very diverse body of staff and, you know, what have you. But one of the key barriers I've encountered, particularly when I'm going for senior leadership roles, was that, yes, it's a very diverse school that I might have picked, but actually the leadership body wasn't diverse and neither was the governing body. So very often when you, like I said, you look around and think, okay, I remember one particular interview I went to, I was just me and 4 white males. And I thought either I'm in for a hell of a chance or no chance whatsoever. And I didn't get the job, so we know what chance I got there. And so I think for me, it's really about people who, when they are thinking about recruitment, for senior leadership, for heads, for deputy heads, or what have you, that they need to start thinking differently about what does a leader look like and what do we want to see in leadership. Because I know I bring something different, dynamic to the table, and there's room for me, but you have to be open enough to want to recruit me. I think that's kind of what I was trying to say in the article.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And we've had a recent episode, I think it was episode 1, was it, Robin, where it was all looking at anti-racism action with recruitment in particular, wasn't it? And looking at different ways of doing that. Fumi, I wonder if you could share some of your experience as well.
Okay, right. So, I mean, I agree with a lot of what Josephine has already said. But just, I suppose, personally, from my own perspective, I always wanted to be a teacher. From when I was a child, I've always wanted to be a teacher. And as I grew, and as I went through the education system in the 70s, early 80s, saw my children go through the education system, could see real issues within the education system, particularly for Black children and young people. I wanted to make a difference. I didn't go into education straight away when I left school, but I went back into education in my 20s and qualified as a primary school teacher in the 90s. Throughout my career, I would say there's always been challenges, and there's obviously challenges for all teachers as you progress through. But I think for Black teachers, it's like we have that additional layer of challenges due to the systemic racism that we talked about in the Guardian article. But I think those challenges, the impact of systemic racism impacts even more as you progress through. So I found when I progressed into leadership, I faced, it was very clear that that judgments were being made, and the interactions with particular members of staff, etc. Were, that there was an underlying subconscious racism. To be the most polite way of describing it, and the most political way to describe it. But I'm a very determined person anyway, and I was determined, I would succeed, and that came from my father, who he himself, so he came from the Windrush generation to this country. He educated himself. He actually was called to the bar. But he found back in the 60s, he was not able to get into that career. And for him and for many of that generation, they made a huge sacrifice because they expected all of us to be successful. Because we were born in this country, went through this country's education system, they thought it would be better for us. So that's what's made me really, really determined that I will succeed, because I saw the struggle that my father had when I was young. And also, obviously, that networking with other Black leaders in education, talking with them, gaining from each other's experiences have helped me to progress on as well. But I have had real significant challenges, which, we haven't got time to really go into, but there have been, real battles as I've progressed through in my career. But it's really important that we do. Because I also think about the next generation. We've got children who are now 4th, 5th, 6th generation from the Windrush generation. And they have got, and most of them, they see themselves as British. For our generation, we always had a connection to another country, the country our parents were from. For the younger people, they haven't really got most of them haven't got a direct connection to one country. This is their country. They have to feel that they belong in this country, that they can become educated, and they can aspire to middle-class occupations and be successful and not be judged simply because of the color of their skin, which unfortunately is something that happens far too much. And I think, Josephine made a really interesting point about diverse schools, because that is a really serious issue, and that really helps to illustrate the issue we've got with this subconscious or systemic racism within the system, because you have got schools with a very high proportion of Black children, and yet we haven't got Black people in the leadership positions. And, we know that there are local authorities that have had Black populations for over 70 years. And still we're talking about how do we address this issue. And so it's really, it's time, I suppose, and I'm glad you've got this program on, that we look at ways that we can really look at how we can make real in-depth change. It can't be surface type, tinkering with things, having a nicer, perfectly written policy. It's got to be real change to the system to make sure that our young...
Oh, Fumi, I think we might have lost you there. Patrick, I wonder if I could bring you into there's everything you're saying there, Fumi. I think it's like really, really interesting, and thank you for sharing that. Can you hear us back again now? Yeah, hi Patrick. I wonder if you could share some of your experiences as well.
Yeah, again, thank you for having me on the show, and I guess I'd like to echo a number of the things that have been said already by Josephine and Fumi. I think that, my experiences are very similar. There are some differences as well, but I think that there is a general agreement, certainly, that there are challenges as a Black professional wanting to move through teaching, becoming a senior leader, and then ultimately becoming a head teacher. And I think one of the things for me, I'll say two things rather than sort of repeat what's already been said. One thing I would say is that what has really struck me is how much of a difference it actually does make to the young people in your school. Yeah. When I first became an assistant head teacher, I remember it was about maybe my second or third day in the job, and I just finished teaching, and I got back to my office, and there was a line of Black kids outside my office waiting for me. They were waiting to welcome me to the school officially, and they were asking me questions like, how does it feel to be a Black assistant head teacher? We're really proud to have you in our school. And it's really fascinating because the school that I'd been at previously had pretty good representation, actually, of people from different ethnic backgrounds in leadership. I went to a school where that clearly wasn't the case, but the ethnic mix of the school was actually very diverse. So just that impact on those students of me being there, I felt that really strongly. And it gives you a sense of responsibility that I think sometimes other people don't necessarily recognize. There is a lot of what I call positive pressure from students and families for you as someone that looks like them to really represent them and stand up for them and be the positive role model they want you to be. That is a very particular pressure that I think that you face, but I think it's an important one, and certainly one that I think that although there is a pressure, it's a welcome one, and it's something that I really embrace. So that's one thing I wanted to say. I think the other thing I wanted to say, just to add to what's been spoken about, is the issue about the different contexts of different schools. And I think there is a similarly big issue for schools in areas where there isn't diversity. And I think that for me is a real issue, because often those schools do not see fighting racism as being a priority for them because they don't have diversity. And actually my experience is that probably those schools need it even more, because a lot of their children do not come into contact with people from different ethnic backgrounds, and therefore grow up with attitudes and stereotypes that are never actually challenged in reality until some time when they're much older. And so I think that's something that I think is really important to kind of address as well.
Yeah,
Can I come in there, Gavin? Can I come in there, Gavin? I'd just like to, this is great to hear this, because obviously as somebody who's been in education, I started out in schools as well. I understand the background that all three of our guests have talked about. That point that Patrick's just made is really a critical one, because this is not just being a role model for Black kids. This is being a role model for white kids. They need to see Black people in authority and take it as being the normal state of affairs rather than exceptional. And I think that's why Patrick's point about, it's an important issue about representation in non-diverse areas, not just diverse areas. I just wonder what our guests think about how we can work together with our white allies to push this agenda further, because anti-racism is not going to be achieved as a culture unless we get white people signed up to doing what they need to do.
Yes, so I'm actually working in Wokingham now. So I've worked in the London local authorities, and I've moved out and I work in Wokingham. And I'm a head teacher of a school where the majority of children are white British. There are Black children and Asian children as well, but it is a majority white British school. But yeah, I think it is very important, and I think the paper that you shared with us earlier shows that if white children have just one Black teacher, it really helps to change their perception of Black people. And the local authority that I work for, I've been really, really impressed with as well, because they are doing a huge amount of work. There's actually going to be a long-term project. So they really understand about racism. They really understand about systemic racism. So they have a long-term project that is set to last for years. So it's not just a one-year thing. It started last year, and their intention is that this is going to be long-term, over years. And the project is on racial equity. And they're beginning at a low level, and they're going to gradually build up. So what they've started to do is that they want people to be aware of their subconscious racism. So it's all about, so head teachers, we've all been trained up, how to lead this in our schools, and other representatives from schools. We're leading this in our schools to help to address that subconscious bias that many white people are not aware that they have. Not all white people have it, by the way. I've got to say that not all white people have a subconscious racism. But unfortunately, there are a significant enough number to have an impact on us and society in general. And if we understand the reasons for that, which is 500 years of history, then we know it's going to take a very, very long time to address. And Wokingham really, really understand that. Now, I would never, if I'd stayed in London, I would never have known, never have considered Wokingham or thought that they would actually be, leading on this type of work. But so I'm really, really impressed. And it actually gives hope for the future. And if other local authorities in predominantly white areas are doing the same thing, that's a real hope for the future as well.
I think that's a really, really interesting point. And I'm really glad you raised, because Fumi, you, like you said, you're in Wokingham, and our other guests are both in London boroughs, which is interesting. How can we increase diversity, in particularly, Josephine, you mentioned it in the article on boards, and also Patrick, I think it's an incredibly important point that it's to show everyone role models, isn't it? And I think how can we sort of escalate this? Because it's interesting, Josephine, you mentioned you've got a policy background as well. I don't know who would like to sort of jump in first, but how can we increase diversity on boards, which is good for everyone, for everything, surely, but not just in sort of London boroughs or in Liverpool, Manchester, but in Woking, in Exeter, in Southampton, wherever, how can we do that?
Can I jump in there if that's okay? Sorry, Patrick, if you were going to say something. I was really enlightened to hear about Fumi's experience, so I'm coming to talk to you a little bit more to hear more, because I totally agree with what Patrick said. I focused on diverse schools because that's really my passion. But you're absolutely right. It has to be everywhere. That every school needs to have somebody from our population, our diverse population in their school, because it is about making sure that people can see what is our world made of. But I think for me, I was in I think it's 2 summers back, so I particularly remember being part of lockdown. I joined a national governing association, a similar discussion like we had today, but it was really focused on increasing diversity in governing bodies. And I think that should be everywhere. It's not particularly London. It just so happens that's our location. That's where I focus my energies and time. And one of the key aspects is about governors understanding and thinking about and responding and being open to and welcoming to parents, because I have been in lots of schools when I've been like a staff governor or a co-opted governor, what have you, and you have parent governors who have come from diverse backgrounds, but you see they're kind of sidelined a little bit. So even though people might say, okay, yes, we've got the surface level, we've got diversity in our governing body, it's about making sure that people feel that their impact is important and that their contribution is important, and they're not just there on a surface level, that are actually helping to make informed decisions. And if for whatever reason their backgrounds may not be conducive to whatever it is that might be discussed, it's about making sure all governors are well trained and are open to the fact that we have to have that diversity in voice and opinion. I think that for me is crucial, because it's a kind of lived experience right now in terms of the interviews and applications I've put in, and knowing, right, what is the governing body makeup of? Are they likely to consider me as a potential candidate? So that's where I've come from in terms of thinking very heavily about how do we make sure, not only if you can't make governors diverse, because you can't force that, but you have to have governors who are open and ready and able to think, okay, look at our school, let's look around, what will be good for our school? What do we need as a school? So that it's not just, having faces for faces' sake. Sorry, I think I took up too much time there. Sorry, Patrick.
Patrick, I'll bring you in.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. And if I just talk very briefly about my own school governing body, because this is something we've addressed in the last couple of years, and we have increased the diversity. And I would say that there are 3 things that need to happen for that to be the case. I think the first thing is that there needs to be a desire to do it. I think some people don't do it because they don't actually think it's important enough. We had various discussions over a number of years. I have to say, I mean, we've improved a lot in the last couple of years, but we've been talking about it probably for the last 6 or 7 years, about the need to make the governing body more reflective of the school population that we have. But I don't think we've discussed it, but we haven't really done anything about it. I think the second thing that we needed was a look at some of the data in the school about the various different indicators, so progress and achievement, but also things like exclusion and detentions and all that kind of stuff as well, attendance and so on. And of course, what you see are those patterns that you typically see and unfortunately seem to persist, despite whatever people put into place. And so I think those are the kind of things that certainly make governors recognise that there is a need to do something. And then what we've actually done to improve it, and we're not there yet, but we've definitely moved in significantly in the right direction, is through the co-opting model. So we have gone out and sought and co-opted governors from Black and Asian backgrounds to join the governing body. I've approached some parents that I know were very capable, but maybe not so confident. And I've approached them, convinced them, persuaded them. I think you have to go out and do it, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. Robin, can I bring you in? Because we're nearly out of time, everyone. It's just shot by, isn't it? What can we learn from everyone's lived experiences here in schools, but across the whole of the education sector? What can we learn from some of these, the consistent messages we're getting here? What do you think we can sort of have as takeaways here, Robin?
I think all the leaders who are our guests today have demonstrated a really clear knowledge of understanding of what caused the obstacles that were placed in front of them, and have achieved despite those obstacles. And that should be, if I were a chair of governors, I'd be saying these people are obviously high achievers, we must appoint them simply because they've overcome those obstacles. Nothing I've heard is of any surprise to me, Gavin. It's about what we do collectively. We all know it's there, but I think in the past, often we've tended to deal with it in isolation. Josephine's talked about the influence of Rosemary Campbell-Stevens, one of our supporters, one of our members. It's great to hear that sort of experience has helped her. But we need to work together, because if we don't work together, we're not as effective as we could be collectively. So my ambition would be to work with Patrick, Funmi, Josephine, and their colleagues and their contacts to make this a cross-sector, schools, colleges, higher education, working to drive anti-racism, that wind of change that we need in the society.
Yeah, because everyone knows education is just so transformative, and how can we then make sure that we're delivering on that across all levels of education? We're completely out of time, but I'm going to go rogue, and we can go over a little bit. I think one thing we've asked everyone on every single episode for every single one of these shows around anti-racism in action is, if you could dream and dream big, what would you want to see to be able to make a difference, particularly the action part of making a change in systemic racism in education? Patrick, I wonder if I could ask you.
Yep, so I've got 3 bullet points for you, so I'm nice and brief. One is that cultural diversity is genuinely celebrated, not in a tokenistic way, but genuinely celebrated constantly throughout, and curriculum, everything, that it's just there. 2, that there are fantastic outcomes and experiences for everybody, irrespective of background, ethnicity, and so on. And the 3rd thing is that every student, every young person in a school, every member of staff in a school feels a genuine sense of belonging.
Yeah, no, 3 really brilliant points there, Patrick. Thank you. Funmi, I wonder if I could ask you.
I suppose drawing from the Dr. Martin Luther King, when you talked about, that there will be a time when we will not be judged by the color of our skins, but by our character, and our ability, our capacity. And also that everybody, and in order for us to get there, everybody needs to know about their subconscious biases, because that's the issue. That's what's really the barrier, because most people know racism is wrong, but many people are not aware of their subconscious bias and how it plays out in their decision making. So for people, everybody has an awareness of that, and that they make a conscious effort to address it when they're aware of it as well. And really, I suppose I support everything that Patrick has said, that we all feel that we belong, and that all of our children attain to their highest possible level and to have successful lives.
Yeah, really. God, Josephine, there's 2 amazing sort of sets of points around the dreaming big there. I wonder if you could share some of your sort of vision and dreams for the future.
Well, I concur with the dreams of Patrick, and for me, I suppose my only last point really is, if you're dreaming big, is that our society is fully reflective of the global around us. And Rosemary Campbell-Stevens coined the phrase global majority, and that's what our globe is. The majority of people are from all kinds of backgrounds, and so that if we're dreaming big, we are globally represented everywhere, in all stratas, of course in schools, but in all leadership roles, in headship roles, in governors, in government as well, because also they're making major decisions, and it needs to be reflective of our global society. So it's really about that sense of belonging, that we are represented everywhere. It's not something that we have to work on, which I know we do and we will be, but if we're dreaming big, it's not something we have to work on. It's just natural. We are there, we're represented, and we feel like we belong. Exactly what Patrick said. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great. Robin, what if I could ask you? Oh, hang on, Robin, I'll take you off mute. Hang on. There you go.
I think I said it already, but I'll repeat it. You know, this is about changing the culture of the nation. That's a very big ask, and we can only do it by working together. So that's not just black people of all ethnicities. It's black people and white people saying this is the way we need to develop in order to have a prosperous and socially cohesive society.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you, Eric. What a really, really cool episode we had today. Thank you so much for taking your time out in half term. Half the nation's in half term, half the nation is back to school. So, you know, thank you so much for taking time out for today. Audience, I hope you really, you know, was inspired and could pick up lots of different ideas and views here. Robin, I think it's a really, really great episode. This is a total collaboration between FE News and Black FE Leadership Group. It's just a really, really cool episode today. So thank you everyone for getting involved. See you all really soon, and I hope you have a really good half term if you're on half term, or if you're at work, I hope you have a really good week as well, and see you all really soon.
Bye everybody.